Of Israelites have, because of idolatry, been taken captive and sent into exile by one nation after another. Most recently, it was Persia. I mean, before that, it was Babylon and Assyria. It's just their idolatry led them into places where God was reproving them and causing them to be in places that they didn't want, so that He could refine them, chasten them, and lead them into new places. Now, last week, if you weren't here, we spoke about the power and the influence and the impact of one person's life on the course and events of an entire nation. We looked at the role of Daniel's life while in exile and the impact that he made in causing the children of Israel to be able to return back to their homeland after 70 years of exile. And so, one of the things I wanted to read to you as we're getting started is this man's life is a testament to us. It's a witness to us. It shows us what one person can do in the midst of being in a situation that they don't want to be in and for a very long time. His life so touches the heart of a pagan king that this pagan king writes the following decree. You can find it on page 263. This is what King Cyrus of Persia writes after witnessing and watching the life of Daniel as a decree to the rest of the people of that nation. He says, Cyrus, king of Persia, says that the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and He has appointed me to build a temple for Him at Jerusalem and Judah. Any of His people among you may go up to Jerusalem and Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And in any locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with freewill offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem. Do you understand how unlikely something like this is? This is a pagan king who does not worship or honor Daniel's God, but he has watched in his life someone with whom he is astonished at the faithfulness and the integrity and the courage of his life. And as he watches and witnesses this life, it does something inside of him. God moves his heart. He moves his heart in such a way that he's now liberating all the people that he has enslaved and his kingdom has enslaved for over 70 years. He's letting them go home. He's freeing the very people that have been doing labor for him. This will come at cost to him in his kingdom. He's releasing them. And as he's releasing them, he's not only giving them their freedom, he's saying to all of the people around them that not only are they to be released, but they are to be supported, that they are to be provided with silver and golds and goods and livestock and free will offerings so that they can take and help rebuild this temple in Jerusalem. So he's not only giving them the freedom to leave, he's helping them by giving them all of the resources by which to do the rebuilding work. It's amazing. This is a pagan king. This is not someone who has worshipped Yahweh. It's someone who has witnessed someone else's life and been so touched by it that God moved his heart to make this magnanimous decision. Then it says, Then the family heads of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and Levites and everyone whose heart God had moved prepared to go up and build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All their neighbors assisted them with the articles of silver and gold, with goods and livestock, valuable gifts, in addition to all the freewill offerings. Moreover, King Cyrus brought out the articles belonging to the temple of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and placed in the temple of his God. You remember when Babylon took over and he took all the stuff from the temple and he put it in his own temple? Cyrus is now saying, get all of the things that were robbed from these people, from the temple, and put it back where it rightly belongs. He is restoring this people. God sometimes uses the most amazing people in amazing circumstances in the most unlikely of situations to do his work. And that's what's happening here. So with the king's favor, the first wave of Israelites return home. It's about 50 to 60,000. There will be 3 waves. Ezra will come and lead the second wave, and Nehemiah will come and lead the third. But this is the first wave. And as they are returning to Jerusalem, what they will find is a city that is in ruins. You remember when the city was sacked and destroyed, the temple was leveled, and it was really kind of a heap of ruin. It was ashes, smoke rising. As they left, they were so distraught. It has not been rebuilt. It has been sitting there desolate for 70 years. So most of the people who are going back don't even have a real good memory. They left the comforts of Babylon. They left a relatively cushy life in the sense that where they were coming from versus where they were headed, it was going to be much harder and much more uncertain. The walls of Jerusalem were down, which meant any time the walls around the city were down, you were open to possibly raiders and warriors coming in and taking you captive and looting and destroying you. So they're very uncertain, very unsure about their future, but they've returned because they have a desire to rebuild God's temple and have His presence dwell with them. Now, when they come back to Jerusalem, does anybody know the very first thing that they do? You know the first thing that happens as they return back to the city? They've been away for 70 years. The very first thing they do is to rebuild the altar for worship. They could have done a lot of things first. I think they got it right. There were a lot of things that could have been much easier to do and would have seemed much more practical, like build your own shelter, right? But the very first thing the Scriptures record is that they come and they rebuild the altar. Now, why is this significant? Could you imagine why this being the first thing that they do might be an important thing? Why is rebuilding the altar the most important thing for them to do? It's the most significant thing because their covenant with God had been broken. They had forgotten their God. They had chosen other gods. They had lived idolatrous lives for years and years and years and years. It's the reason they were in exile. And so as they return back to this burned out, broken down city, they want God to know that first and foremost, top priority, head of the list, is renewing their covenant with Him. Making an agreement that they're going to get it right this time. And so they rebuild the altar and they begin to make sacrifices. They begin to worship God. Now, as they do this, they then begin to lay the foundations for the temple. They are going to rebuild the temple that was destroyed. Why is this important? It's not important because God needs a house to live in, right? God doesn't need a house to live in. But God does desire to dwell with His people centrally in their midst. This is a symbol for you and I, that as they are moving back to the place where they first started, that they're renewing their relationship by God with going back to a place of sacrifice and honoring Him with their worship. Following the altar, they then begin to rebuild the foundations of the temple. This is above and beyond anything else. This is the first thing that they're doing. They get off to a good start. It is easy to start things well, isn't it? It's very easy. But somewhere along the way, their neighbors began to strike fear into their hearts. They began to become a nuisance to them in their personal world. They began to make threats. They began to intimidate. And what started like a good idea has now turned into something that they're not so sure that they want to continue. They start to think, maybe we did have it better back in Babylon under King Cyrus. We had his protection. We had his security. We had cushier homes. We had a place to be. But now they're just being threatened by their neighbors. They have no walls. Those are broken down. They haven't rebuilt the temple. Their houses haven't been rebuilt. They're thinking, maybe we were better when we were in Babylon. It sounds familiar, this cry, because they thought this about Egypt too, right? Sometimes you get in exile so long you think, well, maybe it's just better to live in that place. Followers of Christ, Christians, are aliens and strangers in a different land. We don't live according to the prevailing culture of our day, and sometimes we feel the pain of that. It hurts, it's not easy, and because it hurts and it's not easy, sometimes we think, well, maybe it's just easier to live the way everybody else lives. Maybe it's just easier that way. You know what? It's right. It is easier that way. Is it better? No, it's not better. Not according to God's Word. So what happens is their neighbors come and they intimidate them and they strike fear in their heart. And they basically begin to threaten them. And do you know what the Israelites' response to their threats were? Does anybody know? Does anybody know what they did? They stopped working on the temple. They had laid the foundations and now weeds grow up. It's like an abandoned construction project. You ever seen those? You drive through Asbury, you see a bunch, right? You think at some point in time somebody had a dream about what this was going to be. Maybe it was a school, or maybe it was a daycare center, maybe it was something good for the community. Maybe it was to have some value or dream. Maybe it was a house. Maybe it was something that was going to provide value and benefit for the community. But maybe they ran out of money, or maybe something else happened along the way. But you've seen many of these. These are construction projects where it started with a dream, but at some point along the way the dream gets abandoned. That's what happens here with the temple. They started with energy and passion and focus and priority. And along the way, what happened is they abandoned their dream. And for 16 years, the foundations of the temple lay as the weeds grew up around it. Now, I want you to think about the nature of what it means to start well, because this is really the essence of what this chapter of the story is about. Earlier, I said in our prelude time that, you know, when one takes up the idea of running, it's easy to go and buy the shoes. It's even easy to read online some training programs. It's easy to stretch, and maybe even the first day to go out and run, though painful, it's easy to do it the first time. But if your goal is to run a race, a marathon, there's going to be many places along the way that it's very easy to abandon the discipline of what it's going to take for you to complete the race. Same thing with being in school. It's easy to go and apply for and get into a place where you're going to be in school, some kind of training. Maybe it's a 1-year program, 2-year program, 4-year degree, maybe it's a graduate degree. It's kind of easy to get started. You have these high hopes, this vision, this dream of what you want to be when you grow up. And somewhere along the way, when you get the first list of the 5 or 6 classes that you have to take, it seems like you're going to be a little in over your head, but you're excited, you have desire, you have passion to do it. Until your first 20-page paper is due. Your first exam comes and you're not ready. Well, 1 semester of that's bad enough, but string together 2 semesters and 3 semesters and 4 semesters. It's a lot of hard work to have a vision or a dream for something and then to actually execute that dream. How many abandoned dreams do we have along the way? We can start well, but long obedience in the same direction, it is difficult to finish the race unless there is some kind of encouragement along the way. Because along the way in our races, there are people around us who are discouraging us, who are striking fear into our hearts. There are people around us who aren't lifting us up, who aren't helping us to believe we can do this thing. We must do this thing. So we began to believe those voices. And we settle down into something lesser, something mediocre for our lives. And no one wins. We don't win, our families don't win, the world doesn't win. We exist. We make it from day to day. And it's miserable. And what begins to happen as we allow these things to take root in our heart and God's place in our life is pushed to the margins, is that we become pretty much central to our own personal worlds. We began to develop other plans. I remember when my mom passed away, And then within a year, my brother passed away. I remember I was just so devastated by the loss. I was so disappointed with God. There were so many things in my personal world that were just absolutely turned upside down, and I became angry with God. But I didn't so much. There were moments where I was having those kind of discussions which were a bit blue with God. But it was more just, I didn't abandon God altogether, but I did sort of push to the margins my walk with Him. The disciplines in my life that I practiced that kept me in a place where I could hear God's voice and be led by Him. You know, those times and places where you just get disappointed, you think, I should have had a different life than this. I was trying to do the right thing. I was trying to honor you. I was trying to live in the way that you called me to, and this is the end result of what I get. I think I'll just go do my own thing. Sometimes it's willful, sometimes it's unconscious. At some point in our lives along the way, though, when we hit those places where we're either angry or frustrated or disappointed or upset or depressed, we move into a place where we stop focusing on the foundation of the temple being constructed in our world and God's place being central, and weeds grow up. And we pursue our own things. Now, just as an example, this is just an easy kind of example. Do you guys remember, those of you who were here in the beginning, when we were handed these story cards? And on these story cards, I asked you, I said, I want us to make commitments that we feel like we can live up to and we can do. It's going to be 21 weeks. 21 weeks is a long time. But 21 weeks, I want you to think about these commitments. And on this card, you were going to turn a card in, and then you were going to keep one, you were going to put it on your mirror, you were going to put it in some place that you could see it. But some of these commitments were, I'm going to attend weekly worship service experience. I'm going to be here. Every time the door's open, I'm going to be here because I want to learn. I don't want to miss segments because there's going to be these pieces from the beginning to the end that I don't want to miss.
Excuse me, Pastor Vince. Okay. I know this is out of form, but this is so funny to me because I'm chuckling at myself and what God is doing because chapter 19, I wasn't here for chapter 1. And all this you're talking about going to school and pursuing my master's, I haven't been here. I didn't want to wake up today. It was my daughter who brought me here. And so what you're talking about, things go slow when we think that things are happening to us. It doesn't happen just overnight. You know, I'm going to my 4th semester in my master's program. I just finished my 3rd one. You know, but I don't even remember you talking about this book, you know. So when we think about these people and their faith, and we're thinking in our head, but what about their faith? We should have kept to their faith. That's not human nature. That's not where we are, okay? And I'm like, you brought me here to listen to this. You know, out of all these weeks and these months, and I think it's been like 6 months since I've been here or something, I can't even, this is what I'm hearing? You know, this is like, oh my God, Uncle Maria, this is my life. You know, every day that goes by, you know, it's so easy. It only takes a moment. Watch Netflix. Oh, just one movie, okay? Don't forget about to read or to pray or to even talk to who created us. Let's watch one movie, but it's in a series. Then you watch the whole series. That's how it happens to us in life. You know, so every one of us, I believe, can relate because I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. You know, why don't you just hit me now? You know, it can't be so, it can't be even more blatant than what it is. Chapter 19, are you kidding? You know, so forgive me for going out of form, but I mean, there's just no other example than my own life. Okay, I'm done.
I just want to walk through some of these commitments because I think when we were on the front end and we were thinking about this, we had intentions, we had desire. I just want you to think about it. I'm not going to ask you whether you've kept these. I just want you to think about them when you made them. I will read or listen to the story each week. I will lead or participate in a regular story time with my family. I will join or lead a weekly small group story. I will choose to align my life to God's story. Many of us made these commitments. And I just want you to think about where you are in relation to those commitments. That's just 21 weeks. That's nothing in comparison to the span of your life. Think about the other commitments we've made along the way. Life is hard. Things happen. We get sick in our body. People that are important in our personal worlds die. We lose jobs. We have failed marriages. We have rebellious children. We have deep-seated disappointments and great dissatisfactions that happen in our lives. And those things cause us to respond in a certain way. What happens is the foundations of the temple sometimes for a period of time get relegated to laying barren and weeds grow up. Chapter 19 is about first things first. It's about prioritizing what's most important, even when it takes a long time to realize the things that you desire. I remember thinking to myself, in other places along the way, I had dreams for what I wanted Grace Christian Church to be. Most none of them have had one. There have been places along the way where I just kind of mentally checked out. And I just started pursuing things in my own personal world. Why? Because I had some kind of control over those things, or thought I did. A life of faith is not easy, much of which you can't control. The only real thing you can control in your faith walk is your responses to what God brings your way. And those responses shape your character, which ultimately shape your destiny. It determines who it is that you're going to become and what kind of life you're going to have. There's so many places along the way it's easy to just check out. Not altogether abandon God, not altogether abandon your faith, but to push it to the margins. Make it second, third, fourth, 10th, 12th. It's easy to forget. And once one day passes, the second day is a little easier than that, and then a week, and then 2, and then a month, and then 10. It's really easy. And that's what happened here. And that's what happens with us. On page 266 and 267, God sends a prophet. It's one of the 3 post-exilic prophets. So post-exile, there are 3 prophets that God will bring to call people back. You remember long before the exile in Babylon, all the prophets that God sent to the people and called them back from their idolatry? Remember all those prophets that we've walked through? Well, there are 3 last ones that we haven't looked at. As you hear these names, now you'll have a place for them to understand them in context. Does anybody know the name of the 3 post-exilic prophets? They're not very popular. Haggai, Zecheriah, and Malachi. Okay. Haggai, there is actually a book in here. Any of you familiar with that book? Read it often? Haggai. This is the prophet that I'm going to read to you his words to the people after 16 years of the foundation being laid. They started well. They were building the foundation. They wanted God's presence central in their lives. It had been barren. Weeds had grown up, and here comes the prophet Haggai with a message to the people. He says, "Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai, and he said, 'Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin?'" This is like one of the most powerful phrases in the entire chapter. I don't know how it strikes you at all, but it is incredibly poignant. I want to read it again. I want you to just listen to what he's saying, because these words spoke to me in such an incredibly powerful way. I hope it doesn't get lost because of culture and time. "Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin?" Listen to what he says. He says, "Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but you've harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you're not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it." This is a picture of futility. He says, you've forgotten why you came. You've forgotten who you are. And you're doing all these things, and you're living in nice places, and you're earning wages, and you're living your life. He said, but it's absolutely futile. You get the picture of earning wages, only to put them in a purse that has holes in it? You know how futile that is? He said, that's your life. You started well, what happened? Mile 1 was really fun. You've hit mile 19. Now what's happened? And we fill in the blank with something. Here's what happened. Such and such died. And I'm angry. And I've been angry for years. I'm sick in my body, and I've been sick for a long time, and I can't take it anymore. If you are who you said you were, then I'd be different. And I'm not happy. I lost my job. My house is a wreck. You fill in the blank, however you want to fill in the blank. What happens when we move away from God being central in our life is we just pursue a different life. It's not as if we abandon God altogether, but we might as well, Haggai says, because our lives are totally futile. He continues. He says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. He says, give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. Do you think God really needed a house? I mean, seriously. Do you think God needed them to build him a house? What is he driving at? What he's saying to the people is, I want to dwell with you. I want to be central in your world. I don't want you to forget me. Be angry with me if you must, but engage me. Walk with me. Work with me. Don't build a foundation. Don't start well and let the weeds grow up and then go pursue your own thing. I want you. I made you. I need you. Don't do this. How many seasons of exile do you need to go into until you realize I want to be central in your personal world? He continues. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why? He asked. Because of my house which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields, and the mountains on the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, and everything else the ground produces, on people and livestock, and on all the labors of your hand. What a mean God he is. You won't do this, then guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to withhold all this from you. Well, why would you do that? I got to get your attention somehow. For 16 years, what you started, you didn't finish. You walked away from it. You've been living a life totally against why you came back in the first place. What do I need to do? The only time you've ever seemed to respond to me historically is when you've been pressed into a hard place. So if he takes a hard place, let it be a hard place. I want you. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai. And in 4 years, the temple was completed. Now there were some people there who had witnessed the first temple before it was destroyed, the one built by Solomon. And it was much bigger and more glorious and grand. And they were crying, they were sad because they thought, this little place is nothing compared to this great big place that Solomon has built. But listen to what God says to the people. He says, the glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house, says the Lord Almighty. And in this place I will grant peace, declares the Lord Almighty. My spirit remains among you. Do not be afraid. He says, I don't care about the size of the temple. It really doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the condition of your heart. And you see, we are a people of a new covenant with God through Christ now. And the New Testament describes this whole temple ideal as being you and I. We are the body, the place in which Christ dwells. The condition of the temple matters greatly to God. We can push God to the margins and relegate him to secondary places and tertiary places and places where weeds grow up and cause him to be largely relegated to places that are unimportant in our lives while we pursue things that seemingly are futile and don't matter. I've never read more pertinent words than the words Haggai read to us. I just want to ask you, if you started well somewhere along the way, if you had good intentions when you began your race, and somehow you've gotten off track, to me it doesn't really matter why you got off track. It's just acknowledging that you are. And taking the necessary steps to move back into a place where first things are first. Because to be honest, until first things are first, your life, no matter how successful you may be in the eyes of a different culture, is going to be futile. You couldn't possibly earn enough money. Your houses couldn't possibly be more well-paneled. You couldn't possibly have enough riches in your life to cause you to find the kind of satisfaction that you're desiring. You were made with a God-shaped void in your life, and until that's filled, you will be restless. And God knows that. And so God says sometimes there will be things in your life that cause you heartache, and you don't understand why, and you will grow mad at me and frustrated with me and disappointed with me. Engage me about it. Don't turn away. Don't stop. Don't give up. Don't give out. But for the voice of another person, Haggai, after 16 years. Daniel was the witness that turned the heart of the king. 16 years passed. But for the voice of another person that God used, the place would have stayed in ruin for another 16 years. You understand the value of the encouragement of someone who speaks God's life, God's truth, God's hope into someone else when they are struggling? Do we really need to kick other people when they're down? Do we really need to pile on and make judgments about others when things aren't going the way that they should? Do we need it done to us? We need a word of encouragement from God that comes through somebody who's willing to see something and say something and speak life into it. The race is incredibly long and extremely hard. First mile, second mile, third mile, okay. Mile 19, mile 20, mile 21. Not without an aid station are we going to make it to the finish line. Not without a cup of cold water and encouragement, a word of encouragement, some cowbells and some people to cheer us on, maybe even put their arm around us and walk for a mile or two with us. This is Old Testament stuff, but it is today's reality, this stuff that it speaks to. First things first. So whatever it takes for you to reorient yourself to running in a different way, I want to challenge you this morning to consider, if first things aren't first things, what it might take for you to go back and to get at the rebuilding of the foundation of the temple and to stay at it for as long as it takes until it is central in God's presence. You will never know a better life apart from God's presence being central in your present world. You just never will. Will there be disappointments and frustration and trial and tribulation? Absolutely. But I would like to encourage you, just from my own personal experience, when those things happen to you, maybe turn to God rather than away. Because you're going to eventually do it anyway. You might as well do it sooner than later. There is nothing down the other road that has any value for you. You don't understand what's going on in your personal world, what possibly God could be doing. Maybe that's the time for a brother or sister to come alongside you and to encourage and reach out and to build you up and to walk with you. We need God central in our world, but we need each other. We need Haggai to come and speak truth to us. We need Daniels to show us that even in terrible situations, we can be faithful. These witnesses of these individuals changed the entire landscape and the history of a nation. And so, if they can do it, then why not you? And why not me? And why not us? Why not? There is power in living out one's convictions. There is power in being faithful. There is power in making courageous decisions. There is power in doing the right thing, even when it's hard to do. There's power in that. And it speaks to others. So I just want to encourage you as we move to a close of what I wanted to share with you this morning. I just want to encourage you, if you've gotten away from first things first, I want you to look at your life and consider what it might be to move back into a place where you reprioritize what's most important. Otherwise, Haggai says, your life's just going to feel like it's futile. And if your life feels that way, there's a reason. And I just want you to look at and listen to your life long enough to see why and do what you need to do to go back. All right? Let's pray. Father, thank you that you can take the words of a prophet, we can't even hardly pronounce his name. Most of us have never even read his book. From such a different culture and time and place, and speak to us in a very real way. I ask you this morning as we think about our lives and where we are, that you would renew in us not only the desire to come back and look at the temple foundation that is in place, but to stay at the work that's necessary for us to live the life you've called us to. We all have excuses for why the foundation was abandoned at some point, but none of the excuses matter all that much. Your Son told us that he came to give us life and life to the full. This day, I just want to claim that promise for myself and for these people. Life and life to the full. That's what we want. Lead us as we move towards it and help us to encourage one another in that way. In Christ we pray.